The Denver Broncos trading up in round one to take Colston Loveland, a Week 18 matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs for the AFC West crown, and Bo Nix, top 5 in MVP voting in 2025. We break all that down and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's happening, Broncos Country? Happy Thursday and welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day. Thank you so much to everyone out there in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there who make us your first listen. However you choose to do so, become an everydayer by hitting that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on all your best Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more every single day, all year long. As always, I'm your host, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports.
And I'm Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com.
Together, we bring you the best Broncos podcast that is out there here in Broncos Country. We got a jam-packed episode here today. You know, it is Thursday, so that means that it is takes on takes. You sent in your takes. We share our responses to them as well. We got a lot to open up, and Broncos Country firing off some heat, saying that the Broncos are going to trade up to get Colston Loveland in round number 1, a matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 18 of the regular season to determine the winner of the AFC West, and Bo Nix top 5 in MVP voting. A lot of interesting takes sent our way. We're going to break it all down here on today's episode show. Sayre, Broncos Country, as always, they come correct. There were a ton of great takes fired off. There were some that I would say are some crazy takes. We'll react to a couple of them, some that, you know, you and I may or may not agree with here. I feel like we got to open it up with our good friend, newtype_JK47. He sent in his take. He said, the Broncos will shock everyone and trade up to get a blue chip talent like Colston Loveland, then trade back into late round 1 for Travion Henderson by surrendering the 51st overall pick. I mean, your thoughts on this take here from our friend over there, newtype_JK47.
Wow, this is big time. What I love about this take is the correct identification of a blue chip player in this particular draft class, which Colston Loveland absolutely is. I think if you're going to trade up, there's a very select few players that would make sense to do it for. Ashton Genty would be one. Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, they would qualify as others. This draft just doesn't have very many blue chip types of guys. What's a blue chip type of guy? A blue chip guy is somebody that you feel can be a foundational piece to your franchise, somebody who scores well higher above in every metric than other players on your draft board. They check out character-wise, they check out talent-wise, production, injury, all these sorts of things. That's what makes them blue chip. They are ultra talented and could be potentially elite players at their position. I do believe Colston Loveland has that potential, Cody. Of course, the signing of Evan Engram means that this is it's a spicy take for us to react to, because our good friend Mike Kliss, although it was right after the signing and things like that, he pretty much said tight end in round 1 is off the board for the Broncos. Now, is that really the case? You know, is that what they wanted him to say? Is that just something that they want floated out there? You never know what to actually believe in the draft nowadays, but to give up draft capital to get those, I mean, let's just put it this way. If the Broncos draft started off with Colston Loveland and Travion Henderson, I don't know that anybody's going to be mad about it, right? Those two guys could be big time weapons for Bo Nix now and into the future.
I mean, I would be happy if Denver did get Colston Loveland and somehow still got Travion Henderson. I would say, hey, the offensive stock report for the Broncos, boom, it's shooting through the ceiling here. And when you talk about guys that can contribute, have a big impact, but also it goes to, you know, what we've talked about, like, you know, the Broncos haven't had, I mean, I can't remember the last time they've ever had a situation where they have two really good tight ends, right? Evan Engram, and then obviously if you add Colston Loveland in the mix, that would be big here. But what is Sean Payton's history? I can't quite recall off the top of my head of using two tight end sets where you have two really good tight ends and you can do a lot of different things with them. That might be new territory if the Broncos were to acquire a blue chip player like Colston Loveland, Travion Henderson being thrown in this scenario here. Just a little sprinkle on top. I like that. This is a great take, but yeah, we'll see what happens. And would that be something feasible if Denver gave up that 51st pick to move back into round 1? Is that enough to move up that far? I'm not sure. There might have to be an additional draft pick attached to that if that were the case. But let's jump into our next take here. Wes sends in the take, and he says the Denver Broncos will have a top 10 rushing offense next season. I would love for this to be the case. I think there's a chance that it can happen. So much of it, though, I think is contingent upon what they decide to do in the draft. Do the Broncos have a running back room right now, Sayre? When you look at it, with all the four names, Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, Tyler Bidet, and Blake Watson, if they were to stay status quo with that room as is, would they have a top 10 rushing offense, in your opinion, next season? Or is that contingent completely upon adding one of these backs in this year's draft?
Well, this might be a hot take on top of the take that was sent in, Cody, but I really do think that they would be able to. I think that it's the devil you don't know in many ways, because Javonte Williams was such a hindrance to the offense over the last couple of years. He was the team's leader in overall touches the last 2 seasons and one of the least effective per touch players in the entire NFL. It was just rough to watch. And so you kind of just want to say, hey, yeah, it's the devil we don't know. Like, anybody else that the Broncos put back there for a consistent amount of time, they would be able to figure out a way to get it done. Because what did we see when, Tyler Bidet was put in there early in the season? He had success against Tampa Bay. What did we see when Audric Estime got his first real shot at carries against Kansas City? He had immediate success. What did we see with, Jaleel McLaughlin when he got extensive carries against teams like the Saints? And I think it was the Bengals. I mean, we saw a lot of success, right? So you figure that if those guys were being given the primary carries over the course of a season, that the Broncos could have potentially had a top 10 rushing attack. But Javonte Williams, I'm afraid to say, or I'm sorry to say, really held them back.
Well, and I'm curious as well. I mean, I think that Denver does have the guys that have the potential to, have a top 10 rushing offense. And look, I think collectively, when we talk about a top 10 rushing offense, it's can your team overall, can their rushing output produce, at a consistent rate? Can the yards impact your game there? And that's not just one guy. That's, quarterback run game potentially involved in that. Audric Estime, Jaleel McLaughlin, the committee approach. What does that rotation look like? But are you getting production from more than just one guy? That equates, in my opinion, to having a top 10 rushing offense, unless you have the guys like the Saquon Barkleys or the Derrick Henrys or the Lamar Jacksons, where in totality, you're going to have one of the best rushing offenses because you have really good players that transcend, the position of being able to use their legs there. That, to me, I think is something to factor into the equation as well. Wes sends that one in. I think if the Broncos have a top 10 rushing offense next season, though, Sayre, they will, I think, have a great shot at winning the AFC West. I like that. Great one sent in there from West. This one might be a little controversial. Larry Vaughn sends in this take, says the Broncos get their running back in the draft, but Sean Payton tries to play the Joker card too many times, and our run game is non-existent yet again. I disagree with this one, because just being around Sean and knowing at the end of the season when we talk to him and everything kind of building up to the NFL draft next week, he has emphasized that the run game has to be better. I think the issues that we've seen with the run game, look, Sean has gone away from it at times where it has worked. I'm not ignoring that. But primarily, I don't think Sean had confidence overall in that room led by Javonte as the rusher for them to really kind of commit to it, which is not an ideal thing. You still need to find a way to commit to the run, even if it's not working. You have to be patient with it. I don't think Sean was patient with it, but I don't think that it's going to be non-existent this year. I think it'll be very existent. What do you think of Larry's take here?
I agree with what you said, Cody. I really feel like the reason why the Broncos running game was struggling so badly last year and even the year before is because they just didn't really trust Javonte Williams. I think he was that guy that you felt like you had to have him on the field because he was the one guy that didn't really telegraph what you were trying to do offensively. You could have done anything. You could have thrown, you could have run, you could have done play action, all these sorts of things. Everybody else, there's a bit of a tell, right? We talked about that early last season with Jaleel McLaughlin, with Audric Estime. How much of a threat was he as a receiver out of the backfield? So when he's on the field, I think teams are kind of assuming you're going to run the ball. With Javonte, you kept teams at least on their heels a little bit. And we saw over the course of the season, Bo Nix, I mean, he threw the ball an astronomical number of times compared to what many people figured would happen when he was coming out of Oregon. They figured that, well, he's going to be carried by a running game. No, he actually threw a very high volume of passes last season because the Broncos couldn't trust their running game. So the more you can trust the running game, I think the more Sean Payton is going to be willing to lean into that, strategically speaking, over the course of a 17-game season here in 2025.
I think Sean and everyone understands the importance of a run game in today's NFL, because what does it equate to? You have an efficient run game and you have a smothering defense the way that the Broncos do, especially right now on paper. That manages your clock. That gives you an advantage, in the clock management situation there. If you control the time of possession and you have a 2-score lead there, that weighs heavily in your favor. That's the strategic way to win games going forward. And especially if you're forcing turnovers at a high rate, stopping the opposing offense at a high rate, that right there is what translates to, I think, postseason winning, being able to host a playoff game, winning your division, getting back into the conversation of competing for a Super Bowl. Those are the formulas. I think Sean Payton is going to recognize that here this offseason. And Broncos Country, we're not done. You continue to send in your takes here on Takes Thursday. And one of the spicier ones, the Broncos, Kansas City Chiefs, Week 18 for the AFC West crown and being able to host a playoff game. That's on the line here on Takes. We'll react to that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over at the Gametime app, and there is nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment, it feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Gametime makes it fast and easy to get playoff tickets, even when demand is sky high. Prices on the app, they actually go down as tip-off gets closer, and their last-minute deals can save you up to 60%.
Well, and that's one of the big reasons why I use Gametime, Cody. That last-minute deal, saving you up to 60% off of buying last minute for sports, concerts even, comedy, theater, and more. And the all-in pricing means that there's no surprise fees at checkout. What you see is what you pay. So, hey, you're trying to go and maybe catch the Nuggets in the playoffs, right? Those all-in pricing and no surprise fees, they come in clutch, just like the Joker for the Nuggets there. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Broncos versus the Chiefs for the division in 2025, Week 18. Could we see potentially the division on the line at the end of the year this coming year? We're looking into the crystal ball and we're reacting to your takes on today's episode, Locked On Broncos and Broncos Country. Thanks so much for all of you who make Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day. Happy 1 week away from the NFL draft. We are finally almost there, and we'll be able to discuss the newest members of the team here on the show and the impact and fallout of bringing those guys in. Cody, of course, there's a lot going on with the Broncos right now in terms of team building. We don't even know the schedule yet, but I love the take that was sent in by Lou, our good friend Lou, that the Broncos and the Chiefs, the schedule makers, they're going to orchestrate it so these two teams will face each other in Week 18, right? But not only are they going to face each other in Week 18, it's going to be with the AFC West on the line. This past year, it was the playoffs on the line for the Denver Broncos. Chiefs benched their starters. Broncos absolutely blew them out. What about this take right here? What if it's Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, the reigning, AFC champions, going maybe to Denver in Week 18? I would love to see that with the division on the line. That would be some serious theatrics.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that. I'm going to add a little twist. Let's say it's at Arrowhead for the marbles, right? Week 18, Bo Nix versus Patrick Mahomes. Winner goes, obviously the Chiefs will probably still end up in the playoffs, but probably not, obviously have the higher seed there. I can't imagine, the Chiefs will do as bad as to miss the playoffs, but I think a Nix-Mahomes matchup could be the perfect passing of the torch opportunity where, hey, the Chiefs' time has passed. The Broncos are here. I love that. That would be an ideal scenario here. And obviously, I think that would kind of change the perspective on a lot of people. Now, that means that the Broncos, they have to continue to find a way to take care of business. They got to find a way to win double-digit games because this is going to be a division with the AFC West where 10 wins isn't just going to be enough to win you the division. I think it's going to take you 12, maybe 13 wins to win this division entirely. But you also have to hope too, like that's where, the regular season schedule comes in handy. The Chiefs have opportunities to drop off a little bit, to lose some games, and it increases your chances as well. So can the Broncos find a way to turn those games last season where they lost one-score games? Can they turn those into wins? One of those games was on the road at Arrowhead against Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs here. So I'm all with it, Sarah. I think for the division title, the storylines would be great. And obviously, I think that 18th game, obviously that last regular season game, week 18, what people are doing, I think the NFL, the schedule makers are always making it a divisional game because I think you want to go into that last week of the regular season and be in a situation where there is something to play for. You mentioned, obviously, the Broncos had the playoffs to play for, but so many teams in that last week, they have a lot to play for. Some teams will obviously take care of business and have a cleaner record or guaranteed lock for a first round bye, whatever it may be. They don't have as much to play for. So when you're good and you take care of business, you don't ever have to be in a situation like that. Week 18, Broncos Chiefs, Sunday Night Football at Arrowhead Stadium for the division. I like that. That's a great take sent in here by our good friend Lou. Let's get to our next one here. Jason sends one in, and I'll preface this by saying this is probably one, Sarah, I don't agree with. I think this line of thinking is, I understand where fans are coming from with it. I just can't get on board with this one. Jason says the Broncos should explore trading Nik Bonitto to San Francisco, Indianapolis, or Atlanta and secure their running back tight end of the future, or use 2 first-round picks to trade up with Jacksonville to select Ashton Jeanty. I'm not a big fan of, trading away a superstar player, a guy who's a budding superstar, for draft capital that is or is not guaranteed to be, a necessary hit, but just to move up as well, just to move up for a running back or a tight end. I don't like this. Well, I don't like to rob Paul, Sayre, to pay Peter. I cannot get on board with Jason's take here.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier to stomach the idea of trading draft picks. You never know what you don't have. Like nobody in Broncos country is lamenting not having Devin Witherspoon right now. Nobody in Broncos country is lamenting not having Charles Cross right now. Those are, of course, the guys that the picks that were traded to acquire Russell Wilson once upon a time. And of course, you'd love to have those picks back. You'd love to have, maybe built the team with those picks and things like that. But this is an interesting idea. I don't agree with trading for Nik Bonitto, but I think the discussion about trading up for Jeanty is fascinating because we talked about the blue chip guys in the previous segment, and Jeanty is maybe the best player in this draft. Overall, I think that's, other than Travis Hunter, and he's up there in terms of, right now the running back position has increased substantially in value. We saw how much it helped teams like the Eagles, the Packers, the Ravens to add to their running back room. Is it worth it for the Denver Broncos to mortgage a little bit of their future to trade up for Jeanty, who I can't remember who he did the interview with, Cody, but I saw a clip. There's a clip going around Twitter where he says that the Broncos and the Raiders have shown the most interest in him over the course of the pre-draft process. Now, I'm not sure he's supposed to say that. I'm sure that his agent got a call and was like, hey, stop doing the interviews. You know what I'm saying? Because we're trying to work out this deal. But I find it fascinating that, I don't know if you trade up to the top 5, but inside the top 10, would you give up a future first round pick to get Ashton Jeanty? That's a tough one right there.
It really depends, right? Like, I think Denver can make do. We've seen they've found a way in the last couple of drafts to make do with, not having a second rounder or not having, a first rounder initially. I think they've done a really good job. Sean Payton's first year, they didn't have a first or a second round pick, but they traded into the back end of round number 2 to get Marvin Mims. They traded, up again to get, Riley Moss in round number 3. They had a couple of third round picks there with obviously Drew Sanders and Riley Moss in that situation. So for me, it's like, all right, if Denver doesn't have I think the roster right now that Denver has foundationally, I think is very stable. So for me, I would be okay with trading away a first round pick if you can move up to get a guy like an Ashton Jeanty. Would you do that to get like a guy like Colston Loveland? I'm not sure I would. It's tough. It's a tough debate to have here. I think we definitely took this take and kind of twisted it into something, I think a little bit more of our own here. But no, I like for Ashton Jeanty, I would. But the idea, I don't know if Denver's going to be able to do just that. What would that look like here? Because they'd have to jump in front of the Raiders. What if the Raiders want to trade up if they feel like, a team could try to get them? I know Jacksonville is a spot that people talked about. Would Denver maybe swap with Jacksonville, pick number 20, next year's first round pick, to be able to do that. That's a steep price. I don't know if the Jaguars, where they're at right now, with obviously a new head coach, new obviously general manager there, if they're in a position to sit there and say, hey, we're going to part with this capital, that would have to be an agreement you'd have to establish with that organization. But I think all signs point to the Raiders going with Ashton Genty, and that for the Broncos being at 20, that's hard to do. I would not be comfortable trading away a player for that. But I would be okay with trading a first-round pick and swapping a pick in your first rounder this year, maybe even adding another one there just to be able to do that, to get that guy. But how realistic is that? Probably not going to happen here, Broncos Country. But obviously, we appreciate the takes sent in from Jason here in Broncos Country. Your takes continue to trickle in on today's episode show. We'll tell you why Bo Nix can be top 5 in MVP votes next season and what he needs to do to be in that consideration here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at LinkedIn Jobs. And as a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. And LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place.
So here's how it works. You post your job. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
The fourth quarter action of today's episode of Locked On Broncos is here, and we'll dive into why Bo Nix can be in consideration as a top 5 in MVP voting next season. What would he need to achieve in order to get there? We'll break it all down here on today's episode of the show. Real quick, I want to say thanks once again to everyone in Broncos Country, all the everydayers out there. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. Continuing on with your takes on takes, Broncos Country. We got some good ones sent in. Jonah says that Bo Nix will finish in the top 5 of MVP voting in 2025. Sarah, I think that in order for this to become a reality here, the Broncos are going to have to do several things. Bo Nix is going to have to do several things. First off, Bo will probably have to be in the top 3 in terms of passing touchdowns, passing yards. The Broncos will more than likely have to have a winning record, more than likely potentially win the division, I think, for this to happen. While those things, I think, to so many people outside of the Broncos fan base, I even think some national media is starting to come along on this. I think this is a possibility, more so than it ever has been in recent discussion when it pertains to anybody on the Broncos. But Bo Nix being top 5 in MVP voting would be huge for his early on success that he's already had.
Yeah, where do you figure the over-under starts at this? Do you think like total touchdowns? I try to think of an arbitrary number off the top of my head, like 40 comes to mind initially, maybe 45. I don't think
45 and a half.
45 and a half. Okay, so you got to probably get 46 total touchdowns, which is doable in the NFL for the elite players, and if Bo Nix can take that next step in his game, what was he at this past year? I know he had 29 pass TDs,
4 rushing,
roughly 35 total
35 total TDs.
So he's not far off, because we know there was not much scoring happening in those first 2 games of the season. So there's definitely a chance we could see an uptick. And I think that, look, Bo can do that because he's a dual threat kind of guy. He can rush for 7-8 touchdowns or more, depending on how much the Broncos would utilize him. So I think in a very optimistic, hypothetical world, we could see that jump from him. He's got the ability to do that. And we know that the Broncos offense, a lot of quick strike passes, you're going to get, like we saw against the Atlanta Falcons, against the Kansas City Chiefs, you'll get some opportunities where you have those quick strike throws. The receiver does the rest, right? And they take it to the house and rack up those touchdowns. So wouldn't be surprising to me, Cody, to see him enter that conversation if he maintains that level of efficiency all throughout the 2025 season.
Yeah, and I'd even say on top of that too, I mean, you look at the amount of games he had with 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, and it's all crazy to think that he's still like, I know his rookie season completely gets ignored because of what Jaden Daniels did, which it shouldn't, by the way. But Bo Nix, he threw his first touchdown in week 4. First touchdown, right? So 4 really went 3.5 weeks without throwing a touchdown. Imagine, like, okay, hey, if he was at that pace in which he was in the regular season, what would that have translated to in weeks 1, weeks 2, and weeks 3 from an overall touchdown standpoint? Bo Nix might have had 35, 36 passing touchdowns last season if that were the case. So I think it's very doable. We know he had the transverse process fractures in his back that impacted his ability to use his legs as a runner down the stretch. The Broncos wanted to protect him. So, I mean, you're talking about an opportunity here where he could have 30-plus touchdowns, maybe even 7 or 8 rushing touchdowns this upcoming season. Best case scenario. I think that's awesome. You got to aim big, shoot for the stars. If he can do those things, I think Jonah's take is very realistic. He could have maybe, the opportunity to be top 5 in MVP votes. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Jaden Daniels in consideration this past year for MVP in terms of voting as well? I think that was something that was on the table. So why can't Bo Nix be in that conversation when Bo actually had more passing touchdowns, more passing yards, et cetera, et cetera? I digress. We'll continue on here. Our next one comes in from Darnell. Darnell says, Marvin Mims is bound to be a legit number 2 wide receiver this year. Last week, somebody said Troy Franklin. Marvin Mims now in the equation here. Sarah, I kind of want to turn this into how the Broncos can maybe transform him a little bit further to build on that second half stretch. Is it more so keeping him in the backfield, or is there a role where you're like, hey, let's find a way to, use him from time to time there? But primarily, how can we get production out of Marvin when he's lined up in the slot or on the outside?
Well, it's got to be a consistent involvement in the game plan and consistent targets, right? That was what worked over the second half of the season, was just a concerted effort by the coaching staff to get him involved. You and I talked about on this show after the Seahawks game, after the Steelers game, after the Buccaneers game, after all those, the Jets game, we're sitting here wondering, why is Lil Jordan Humphrey getting all these targets and not Marvin Mims? Why is Josh Reynolds getting targets and not Marvin Mims? What's going on here? You have this guy that you trust to go catch punts, you trust to return kickoffs, you trust him with the ball in his hands, and yet you refuse to get the ball in his hands. I think it's just exactly what we saw down the stretch last season, a concerted effort to get him the football. Now, he's different from other wide receivers, though, because it's not like we've seen Marvin become this route running maven out there. And it's easy for me to say I'm not a route runner. I'm not but Broncos receivers did struggle to create separation at the catch point last year. And the only way that he was getting it was vertically down the field. So we need more of that from him, a more complete, well-rounded game from Marvin. And I think he can take that next step.
I think maybe the addition of Evan Ingram, if you get a running back or if your run game is successful, I think it opens things up for Marvin, because there's times when I'm watching film on Marvin's open, but it's for a split second, right? There might be pressure that negates, a clean pocket for Bo. And it's like your chance to maybe get him, like Marvin may not be the first read, but he might be the third read there and he's coming open. But because of pressure, timing, you don't necessarily get there. That's why like Sean is so delicate with how he constructs his offense in terms of the routes. Like, you get a certain coverage. This is our route concept. You get a coverage change. This is how our routes within this play call, how it changes and how it's altered. And all of that, you have to know it on the fly. Like, that's the crazy part that so many people don't realize how complex the NFL is. So there's an evolution, I think, still to be had there. And Marvin's obviously taking strides there. I think he can get some help if the Broncos offense gets better in a couple of those areas, tight end production, run game production as well. I think that'll be a big key for him to become a potential wide receiver 2 here. Our last one here on Takes Thursday, Kodiak Bronco sends in, adding a legit middle of the field weapon like Evan Ingram or another tight end in the draft or slot wide receiver in the draft is going to have a trickle down effect and make the run game so much better. I agree by definition. I mean, Sarah, this is probably one of the more important things that we've been calling for here for the Broncos offense. And how many years? Like, you have to have complementary football, and the Broncos simply haven't had that. They got the pieces where I think they can start to complement this offense and open things up, I think, especially for the run game.
when you have more players who are threats with the ball in their hands, it keeps defenses guessing way more often. It's just that's the reality. Is that last year the offense was Bo Nix carrying things, and it relied heavily on the scheme in order to be able to, hey, Bo Nix has to hit the deep dagger route down the field. They're really relying on their quick passing game. They're really relying on, this concept or that concept. When you can stop relying so much on concepts and start relying more on talented players, that is going to lead to offensive success that ripples down through every player on the roster. You and I have talked about how much Evan Ingram helps even Cortland Sutton. Having those guys all out on the field at the same time and then handing the ball to somebody like Ashton Genty or Travion Henderson or Omarion Hampton or whoever the heck it may be, if you've got Sutton and Ingram and Mims and all these other guys out there that can create offense, now all of a sudden you're saying, hey, we're going to run to the perimeter where these guys are good blockers on the outside and they can take defensive backs out of the mix. It's just, it keeps everybody on their heels defensively and gives you such an advantage. So upgrading, that's the short reason why upgrading the talent department offensively is so critical, or offensively, is so critical for the Broncos in this draft.
Yeah, and look, I think flexibility, foundation, options, the Broncos, they have all of this right now, and I think they have good pieces around Bo Nix, and you can only add more pieces. I think that'll help you probably put together the puzzle that is, how do you figure out how to sustain this thing long term? And I think that's where George Paton, Sean Payton, they've always had these meeting of the minds approaches where they are envisioning what they can do this year, but it's also what can we do next year? What can we do 2 years from now, 3 years from now? It's about being, in the present, but also forward thinking. And that's where the Broncos are at. And I think that this is going to be a draft that's coming up next week that will, I think, give us a really great insight into where the team views their future and the direction in which they're heading and where they are going to, prioritize maybe growing this roster even further. I mean, right now they have one of the highest paid defenses in football. You got a lot of highly paid players there. You got guys on that side of the ball that are coming up with extensions in the near future. So how do you build this offense the right way? That is the challenge. And we'll see if the Broncos can find a way to do just that. But with that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. We appreciate you as always for tuning in and giving your takes here on Takes Thursday. For all you everydayers, tomorrow, there's a lot of jam-packed stuff going on here on the Locked On Broncos podcast. You're going to get our Locked On NFL mock draft where we sat down and we looked at the board based on every host around the Locked On NFL network. They made their picks. We made our pick at pick number 20. You'll get that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos, and you'll get an NFL squad reaction show as well here, wherever you get your podcast. Broncos Country, we'll see you then for another episode of the show.